So last night after I got back from dinner, I was looking through my Instagram and I come across a post by Joe Rogan, and it's him and Aaron Rodgers. And he said that he had just posted the podcast episode with himself, Joe Rogan, as well as Aaron Rodgers. And when I first heard that Rodgers was in contact with Joe Rogan last year in the middle of, the whole COVID situation, I was just hoping the day would come that Rodgers would appear on Joe Rogan's podcast. Because I've been a huge Joe Rogan fan for a long time. I just enjoy lots of his podcasts and all the conversations, like the 3-hour conversations he has with people. So when I saw Rodgers, was getting on it, I was like, okay, time to go watch for 3 hours. So I finished like 2 hours last night, finished the last hour early this morning. But what I love just is to hear, someone like Rodgers go on there, have a conversation where he just talks about everything as most people do. And he's not afraid to say what he thinks. As we saw last year, he started to speak more about what he really believes, which I think nowadays is something that isn't very common just because, with whatever is the mainstream idea, if you talk against it, people try to, come down on you a little bit, I would say. But it's nice to hear someone like Rodgers coming out there and not being afraid to say what he thinks. And so it was a very interesting conversation. They talked about so many things because it is a 3-hour-long podcast, starting with the entire COVID situation with Aaron Rodgers and everything that was going on there, which was very interesting. Definitely gave a lot more insight onto everything that happened. We did hear last year Rodgers talk a lot on the Pat McAfee show, but there was a little bit more depth to it, and there are definitely some new things you could learn from what Rodgers said there. And then one thing I want to touch on too that was a very interesting story is Rodgers was talking about, or Joe Rogan asked Rodgers, so like growing up, was it sort of a pipe dream for you to play in the NFL? And Rodgers first tells a story about one of his friends who, when he asked Rodgers basically, what are you going to do? And he's like, I'm going to play in the NFL. The guy was sort of like, yeah, right, you're not going to play in the NFL. And then, so that was the first story. And then he talks about his one college class that he had in Cal. He apparently was in this huge class with like 600 people. He didn't cite something right or something like this. And there were like 15 of them who didn't cite something right. 14 of them had the opportunity to come in and basically redo it. The teacher gave them that ability to come in and redo it. But because the lady seemed to have this like agenda against Rodgers. She, because he was an athlete, she basically told him like, you're entitled, you're not going to be anything. And she said like, you're not going to make it to the NFL. And he was like, watch me. So that was interesting story. The fact that someone would say that to him, but just for him to, in that moment, really believe in himself, believe in himself enough to say, you know what? It doesn't matter what people say. Like, I'm going to go for exactly what I desire, and I'm going to make it happen. And so to see the entire career Rodgers has had, you could tell he was a little, excited that he was able to prove some of those doubters wrong along the way, which I imagine is a good feeling to really, I guess, realize your full potential. But there was so many different things that could be taken away from this podcast. I mean, endless topics, and that's sort of what happens when you have a 3-hour conversation. So if you guys have not checked it out, you should definitely go watch it on Spotify. I believe there are some clips posted onto Rogan's YouTube channel where he posts some nowadays, but the entire full 3-hour sit-down interview is on Spotify. And honestly, I wish more like top athletes would do these kind of podcasts, but it makes sense where, because these guys are so talked about, like someone with Aaron Rodgers, like people are going to sparse through every single point you say and try to write some kind of article about it or about you, which makes sense when you're the most talked about player, one of the most talked about player in the NFL, and someone who has become more controversial because he says what he thinks and not everyone likes what he says. But it's all of us have different opinions, and I think it's nice to see a place where you can express those opinions regardless of if you agree with someone or don't agree with someone. So I was very excited to watch that entire podcast. I know lots of you guys were as well because I shared it last night. And lots of you guys seem excited that he was going to be on the podcast. I just wanted to share that, my little takeaway from it. I'll give some of my thoughts. But that is all I have for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, as always, and I'll see you guys next time.